Hi, this is the Seattle Angel Conference workshop series. Today we have Michael talking about story testing for startups. Michael, take it away.
All right. And hopefully everybody can see the first slide of the presentation.
Yes.
Hi again. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Again, I'm Michael Semer. I am a content strategist, a creative director, a copywriter of some years' experience. The gray hair may be a giveaway. Over the last decade plus, I've worked for a lot of tech startups and growth mode companies to help refine their messaging, their branding, and a lot more besides. This session is really going to be about how you can treat content as a tool for discovery, validation, and growth of your company. If your product is new, if your brand is still forming, and your audience isn't fully locked in, or in some cases isn't even cooked yet out in the general market, so you're way out in front of them, this framework that we're going to talk about is going to help you get clarity before you scale and before you waste any of your runway kind of chasing down rabbit holes that you shouldn't in the first place. But we'll get into that. Now, I'm sure this isn't news to a lot of you, but it's worth recapping as a starting point, and maybe some of you, this will be new news. Startups in nearly every segment often find that they're rushing into brand identity and messaging and even product development without proving whether the narrative they're pushing out there is going to land with the people that they want to engage with and convert. Before you think about any taglines or logos or go-to-market campaigns, even about functionalities in some cases, you need to prove your fit. Otherwise, there's real potential for you to be wasting a lot of your runway and a lot of your money, as I just said. Story testing, in other words, is not really optional when you're starting out. It's an agile, content-driven version of product market fit validation. No matter how big or how small your enterprise or your ambitions or your story may be, or how well you may even think that you know your target, until you validate your story, you're making assumptions. And without story testing, and by making assumptions, you're not really growing a brand, you're rolling the dice. You are gambling with the future of your organization. So what are the questions that have to be asked at the very inception before you take a single step towards doing any kind of real branding or marketing effort? When you're starting out, your product is new, your audience is unknown to you, or it may even be just emerging, or you may feel like you know them, but that can be misleading in some cases. So any positioning you develop is absolutely hypothetical right now. Every piece of content you create then can be viewed as an experiment, whether it's a tweet, whether it's a blog post, whether it's an email, a landing page. It's your chance to build a testing matrix. It's your chance to find out what works, what doesn't, and capture invaluable data that helps you shape your branding and your messaging and even your product as you move forward from here. And content is the lowest cost, highest signal way to validate a message and whether your product is going to resonate in the general market. The faster you can test these stories, the faster you learn who your real audience is and what they respond to and how to speak to them in a way that is going to earn their trust and their attention moving forward from here. Now, skipping story testing is far more than just a missed opportunity. Some people view it as a luxury. It isn't. It's an absolutely necessity. Skipping it actively creates risk. You could waste budget, and as I said, ramp up runway time, promoting messages that aren't going to land. You're going to confuse your market because your messaging and your positioning may be inconsistent because you haven't bothered to work it out and test it beforehand. And you're going to scale up the wrong story entirely. That may seem like it's kind of far-fetched. It's not, because I've had actual clients who were in high growth mode and they look back and they say, oh, we've been telling the wrong story all along. We've had some success, not as much success as we should have had because of the fact that we focused on the wrong things. So if you tell the story correctly, if you've tested it and you validated it, you're going to get higher acquisition rates. Simple as that. You're going to minimize brand confusion, and you're going to avoid the need to pivot somewhere up the line. Now, again, I said, I've seen all of this in action with clients who've brought me in over the years to help fix these situations. You know, they've had these problems created and they don't really understand it. They didn't do storytelling in the first place, or they did it in a certain manner. And it's kind of like, as John said, they went out and talked to somebody on the street, or, you know, their best friend, or the one customer they've been working with an awful lot. And, you know, these people are liable to validate what you think. They aren't necessarily validating the truth about your brand or the truth about the marketplace. You know, they're not helping you exercise discipline about your messaging, helping you adapt and communicate your brand story in the best possible way. Testing your story early and often helps you avoid all of these traps. And you're creating a story that's really going to connect. So here's the structure we're going to follow, which maps to the startup journey, but is focusing on the narrative arc we want to create around story testing and storytelling. Discovery. Is there a real pain point or a real need that has to be addressed? For who? Validation. Does the solution you have work for that? Creation. Are we speaking the language of the right market or sub-market? And scale. Have we earned the right to grow this story so we can reach out to a broader market? And at every stage of this, we're going to use content as our primary testing tool. As I said, it's the most cost-effective, high-signal way of testing your story. Now, this is the stage at which we begin to make it practical. First, you have to start by understanding your customer's pain, not theoretically. And I'm sure, you know, in a lot of cases, entrepreneurs, startups have a very rooted understanding of it, but sometimes it's a very narrow spectrum. You know, they know what they know, but they don't know about other potential subsets or about the broader market. So the best thing you do is to reach out and converse with these people so you can hear in their own words about what their pain points are, about what their needs are. You should actually interview them, find out what frustrates them. Your job is not to pitch. Your job is to listen, to capture information, to capture insights and reflect on those insights. Engagement is going to be your indicator that you've accurately captured the problem and you have created messaging that helps them engage with you. But to do that, again, you have to have this understanding. If you deploy any content at this stage of things, it's to validate the existence of these problems. For instance, you would publish articles that talk about key topics and challenges in your marketplace, but you're not talking about your product. And this is not necessarily long form content. It's, as we say, lightweight content. You just want to get these kinds of position statements or messages out there. You're not yet proposing your product or a solution. You're just trying to get responses. You're going to audit those responses. You're going to use polls to test which problem statements are going to get the most traction from people. You read the comments that people make. And you measure click-through rates and other key data points in order to determine which, what are people sparking to? If nobody reacts, the problem might not be as urgent as you thought it was, or it'll take further investigation, but you might find that, hey, maybe I didn't frame it correctly. So you try a different message around the same point and see if that works. That's an important thing to remember. right now. Don't make any premature assumptions, and don't be dismissive necessarily of an idea you hold firmly to. If there's a seemingly fruitful strategy you've got in mind that in your experience ought to work, don't walk away from it just because one or two initial tactics or pieces of content didn't get a great response. Go back in and try again. Push out new ones until you find something that does work. And it's up to you, but at a certain point, you're going to say, I can't get this to work at all. So obviously it's a failed strategy. So I'm going to walk away from it and move over to something else, but at least give it a chance. Now, if you've gone through that process and you're very confident you've identified this real pain point and you have insights from members of the market or your customers about it, now you got to test whether your solution resonates as a credible fix. And this is where you use things like use cases and case studies from actual users, if you've got them, and demos and walkthroughs. This is where they really matter, because you're answering the question, do these people believe that your solution is real, that it's usable, that it's valuable to them? You got to run content that shows how it delivers actual transformation for its users. It's got actual value. So in doing that, you're measuring the opt-ins, you're measuring the demo signups or conversion lift to see, is this working? There's a pro tip I'm going to give you on this, and that is that, again, if you've published content for the purposes of story testing and it doesn't work, scrub it. Especially if it's being used at this stage just for testing purposes. We are not at the point where we are actually doing marketing. Even if a piece of content was successful, you should remove it too. You're not interested in content actually delivering results. You're interested in delivering data. And even if it's successful content, it's very likely not to be in line with your final positioning and messaging architecture. Again, remember that the point of any content we deploy at this point is simply to test. It's not to be evergreen. It's not necessarily to be, traffic driving over the long haul. It's to test and validate, period. Now, the only exception to this is if you come up with a piece of content that performs spectacularly. In that case, as soon as you have revised your final or semi-final messaging architecture and branding, you go back and you update that content so that it aligns with whatever that final architecture happens to be. Now, tactically, we're using A/B testing here. We're putting out different versions of things, 2 to 3 different versions of a given piece of lightweight content. Different ways of explaining the same value prop. For instance, do people care more about saving time, reducing errors, improving compliance, cutting costs? Let them tell you. Create different versions of all these landing pages, these blog posts, social posts, even emails and videos. And that way you're going to be able to tell your stories in different ways and track what pulls best, not just in terms of the messaging necessarily, but in terms of the channel you're delivering it through, and maybe even the format and design of the asset that you're created. I would encourage people to try different formats, different looks and feels in order to do this. If you're doing LinkedIn, you can try static ads, you can try carousels. That's just one example. Develop use cases and actual case studies, as I said, that show a clear contrast between a user's situation and the improved results they saw afterward. And sometimes those examples might be hypothetical, in which case you have to tell them plainly that it's just a use case and these are projected results. But, this is a proven storytelling technique. It really ratifies your message and your product, and is extremely persuasive during, the validation stage of things. And once you've got customer feedback or prospect feedback, you're integrating that in turn into the story testing process in order to generate new tests with new content to see how that performs. It's a continuous improvement cycle. Now that may sound like a lot, but it doesn't have to be. Like I said, we want to do marketing with a lowercase m here. We're only doing this for testing. It's, small ball. It's not necessarily expensive or broadly distributed. We just want to do it in a very focused way in order to see what results we're getting off. Now, once we've done that, we can get into a situation where we're able to focus, and this is where we're getting more into the creation stage of things. We've identified your highest signal submarkets by the process you've just gone through. Those are the segments where the fit is going to be tightest. So you want to tailor your language to them. You want to tailor your tone, your use cases, everything to address each of those different markets, whether it's verticals or it's members of a buying committee within an enterprise. A one-size-fits-all strategy is never going to work here. It may work to a certain extent. It's not going to work optimally. A good way to get input on this is to ask your sales team and your customer support people, what do they hear from prospects and customers in these subsegments? I was shocked and appalled to hear how some of my clients in tech never talked to the sales and CS teams. They were never getting feedback through those loops about what worked and what didn't work. It's absolutely essential. Doesn't mean that sales and customer support have to rule your messaging strategy, but you need to be talking to them to get great input. You have to be boiling down to industry-specific pain points. You have to be looking at business models that where you can develop tailored messaging around them. Again, all of these should be tested to discover what specific messages are going to work with specific submarkets and within the personas within those submarkets. The CTO at a company is going to have different concerns from the CFO, who is going to have approval power, or from somebody who's working down in the trenches in IT. Different messaging for each of those folks, but they're all going to have a voice in making the recommendation and purchase decision. One thing, though, too, is to always be aware of the possibility of diminishing returns. I've fallen into this trap, too, where you are looking at too many submarkets and too many personas. You're trying to reach out to everybody. You've got to have some discipline about that. And you've got to say, how much potential upside is there really among all of these? Because then I'm, throwing money at personas or at submarkets that aren't going to generate that much return for me. So again, exercise some discipline there, unless you think there's really useful data you can pull out of them. But if you're looking at from a standpoint of engagement that will eventually turn into conversion, then you may have to rule out some people and some markets. The content you create has to be modular. You've got this core messaging we develop, messaging blocks, and these can be reused across vertical specific, persona specific pages, assets, emails, whatever. Again, the point is to have content that is intended to flex to meet different situations and niches and personas. Again, like I said, the content at this stage during story testing should be lightweight. Don't generate a 5,000 word white paper or conduct a webinar even. The point is we're still testing. We just want to get as much testing out there as possible against our select targets. For instance, one client of mine is in the legal business. So they used to do for corporate legal departments, and they used to do all of their content was targeted against the chief legal officers at these organizations, or the general counsel. That was simply wrong, because of the fact there were a lot of other people who had a hand in this process, especially down in the legal operations or even the IT department. They had different concerns. A reasonable pricing model is really going to appeal to the CFO of an organization, but Others in the organization are going to be more concerned about the end user benefits that they see from adopting a specific platform or product. Small adjustments can make all the difference in a case like that, because you're making them more relevant to particular targets. Again, it goes back to use cases that can be specific, or case studies can be specific to specific personas within a targeted segment, or even an organization if you want to do account specific. But those can drive pretty big shifts in terms of conversion. And again, personalization, I don't know if anybody else is as sick of that word as I am, but it holds true, especially in the age of AI. Personalization is a big part of everything today with every kind of prospect. They basically don't have time to waste on irrelevant messaging from you. They want to see something that speaks directly to them. So hopefully by now in this process, we've got clarity on the market, on the message, on the value props we want to be putting out there. So here's where you'd be thinking about, how do I scale this? That means you're at the point where you're ready to invest in real content operations and SEO and paid channels and full funnel content, developing a full-fledged calendar, full-fledged customer journeys. But everything that you scale should be based on the tested and validated stories and messaging that you've already proven. You shouldn't lose focus just because you've got more budget or there's a lot more to do here. It's got to be coming back to what you've already validated. And don't stop analyzing the success of those stories, even when you've got that budget and you have begun trotting it out in the market in a very real way. Marketing with a capital M now. You really have to maintain its efficacy by constantly auditing it, looking at the analytics and seeing if it's still working, or maybe something has changed because of the fact the market has changed, or there may be some other factors that have been introduced. And that efficacy I talked about is always first. I've had growth mode clients who have enormous inventories of content that they were created using the old shotgun approach to SEO. And since they had no testing and no analytics and no content discipline about this, they ended up with huge inventories of content that largely didn't deliver, but they had no way of knowing whether or not it delivered. They just knew that the CTO 5 years ago wrote this one column and we've still got it up because he's still the CTO today. And we'd hate to insult him by saying, maybe we ought to take this down because nobody's clicking on it. A lot of organizations, when they get in the growth mode, end up with literally hundreds, if not thousands, I've seen thousands of pieces like that. And it's all that out there. And by putting all of this kind of diffuse, unfocused content that doesn't align with whatever your current story is out in the world, you're damaging that story, you're damaging your brand, and you're compromising everything. So that's what comes back to, I said before that if in the story testing stage, you ought to be scrubbing stuff. At this, when you get later on in the process and you begin actually marketing and you actually begin putting content out there, look at it, and if it's not working, scrub it too, because if it's not delivering, it's just going to create problems for you and static and confusion and cloudiness down the road. Take my word for it. And bear with me. Sorry about that. Here's the process of activating a story testing regime, and I've broken it down into the functional steps that you get from the start to the finish. First, you define hypotheses around your story. You identify 2 or 3 core positioning hypotheses that you want to test. We help X audience solve Y problem through Z method. You brainstorm distinct emotional or functional value propositions you can use around this, and you translate these into 2 to 3 simple narrative variations. Again, lightweight, as I said, but they're distinct from each other, distinctive enough for you to test. Then you map your target personas and segments. You define the initial buyer personas based on all those interviews or investor pitch data or whatever source you can obtain. You highlight the key verticals, 2 or 3 of them, or a number of use cases per persona that are going to be relevant to them. And then you prioritize this by what's the revenue impact that they can potentially generate for us. What's their alignment with our product market fit over time. Then you develop these lightweight content variants where you're adapting that core messaging you did in the first step, and you are adapting it to these niches that you have just identified. You create short form assets, a short form LinkedIn post, a cold email you send out, a blog excerpt, landing page snippet, social media posts. And you match each piece to a specific single hypothesis and a single persona. And again, this is all being built out of an overall testing matrix you create for all of this. And again, you keep these formats as modular as possible, so they're very easy to reuse across different channels. You run channel-based micro tests using this content. You find low-cost, high-signal channels. LinkedIn organic specifically, Twitter or X, Reddit, others. And you are pushing content out there, even things like email or sponsored newsletters. And you're using these content variants and you're matching them to the audience segments. And you run these for 7 to 10 days in order to gather some directional insights about whether or not they work. You're tracking the resonance and the feedback. And that involves, what are the early signal metrics that you want to look for? Is it the click-through rate? Is it shares? Is it bounce rate? Time on page, all of the above, and so you're comparing your message traction across different audience types, different formats, different channels to see what works. You're using lightweight surveys or CTAs in order for qualitative validation of what you're doing. Want to learn more as a CTA, does this describe you in a poll or in some sort of personality test that you could run, even in B2B? There's a whole host of different tactics we could do here, but we want to confine ourselves to more direct and lightweight ones that can be easily adapted to different channels, and even the messaging can be swiped out. And from that, you're analyzing what's sticky and what we can skip. What are the top performing storylines by persona, channel? What's not working? Why isn't it working? Is the tone wrong? Is the pain point the wrong pain point? Not a pain point at all? Is the benefit too vague, not substantive enough? You're looking for patterns across all of your winning messages that you want to replicate, that you want to model on. And those include the language you're using, the emotion that you're touching on, and the outcomes that you create out of that. And obviously from there, we want to refine, improve, iterate, and get internal alignment on all of this. You want to build this validated messaging library. This is the stuff that has been proven in practice, and that's going to be used to guide your website, your pitch decks, email cadences, your product copy, everything. You're going to retest, refine versions, on targets that are possibly more narrowed or on new channels, just to see if it works there or has to be further adjustment. And you're going to use those results to align the product team, the sales team, the brand team, the marketing team, so they've all got the same foundation to move forward with. They're all speaking from the same singing from the same hymnal, as the old expression goes. And to do that, you create a messaging architecture that they all have to obey. And it's what they have to utilize in all of their communications. And that messaging architecture can be extremely granular. It can get right down to, what a sales engineer is using to just do an offhand email to a prospect or an existing customer. And even, smaller occasions than that. But everything is under that messaging discipline that comes out of a messaging architecture. Now, here's some of those pro tips. We've already covered a couple of these, but here are some tips you can follow as you move forward with messaging and with testing your stories, and then beyond as you actually get into marketing. As I said, if you've published content for story testing, as soon as it served its purpose, scrub it. Even remove the successful content too, because you're not in real marketing mode yet, and it may not align with final messaging, and it may actually interfere with your end positioning if it's still out there. As I said, I've seen this before, too many times. You got to start building a content and messaging library right now. And there are plenty of platforms to help you do it. Even if you're using story testing content, this gets you in the habit of collecting, recording, and indexing all of the content that you create over time and keep it updated. Again, this goes back to my work with other clients, some of whom have been fairly advanced companies in terms of marketing in various spaces. And you ask them, well, where's your content library? And they say, well, we've got one, but we haven't updated it in 2 years. Or I'm not sure we've got one, and I'm not even sure how many pieces of we've got. I had one client and they said, how much content have you got? And they're a company that had been around for 8 years. And they said, we're not sure. Why don't you just go in and do an audit, and we'll tell you the places to go to look for it. And I came back and I said, you've got 8,000 pieces of content. And nobody has any idea, but it's all live, and nobody has any idea of whether or not any of this has still getting traction. So that's a key reason to have a content library and have somebody be accountable for keeping it updated. Never stand still on your personas or your customer profiles. Companies do that, even big companies sometimes, even big CPG companies that invest a lot of money in knowing who their customers are. They'll sit on a persona for 2 or 3 years. Sometimes because it's working for them, but they never bother to dive back in to see if that persona has evolved over time. So they're not optimizing against that persona because they don't have a current understanding of what's going on out there in the real world with these personas and with these customers, what their concerns are right now or what their concerns are likely to be in the near future. And again, get your sales and customer support teams involved so they can tell you what they're hearing. Again, you'd be appalled at how infrequently these folks get called into the room, at least on a quarterly basis, to say, well, here's the buzz out there. Here's what I think you ought to be doing with content and messaging, and here's where it can help us, and here's where I've actually gotten some frowns from people I talked to out there about some of our messaging. Again, this is ultimately, this is your playbook. The thing to do is to not treat content as a bolt-on in any way. It is your first best method of validation. You can test faster and smarter than with product builds alone. You can use it to align your team on what your customers really care about and why your solution matters to them. And that is going to deliver a very real story market fit. And that's what we're looking for through the story testing process. Now, at this point, I wanted to throw it out to you folks. We're going to have a discussion phase here. And thanks for letting me go on for all that time. We're going to have a little discussion phase here where I'd love it if you could tell me about some examples of brand or product stories you've seen that have really impressed you, or maybe you've seen some that you felt were absolutely disastrous or an entirely bad fit. But what was it that impressed you about the successful ones? Maybe it impressed you enough that you bought the product, licensed it yourself for your organization. What was so compelling about it? Maybe it was even just the way it was delivered. Maybe it came in a creative format of some kind. The tactics they used to get it in front of you were inventive enough. Sometimes the way you bring a story to your audience can also be an indicator of your own story. It says something about your organization if you're doing it in innovative and relevant ways. So with that, I'm going to throw it out to you folks. If anybody wants to chime in or maybe give you a minute to think.
Can you lower your screen so we can see faces?
Sure.
What do people think? Any brand stories you want to put on the table?
Patagonia.
Yeah, what about Patagonia?
Their message, the 1% for the planet, the fact that they're typically viewed as one of the most reputable companies in the US because they're doing the right thing, and people, I think, connect with that.
Yeah.
So funny that you mentioned that. Michael always talks about Patagonia. I just had to mention that.
I do because a long time ago, 15 years or so, I was became acquainted with the concept of lighthouse branding, which I don't know if any of you folks have heard of, but it's a big CPG thing. Apple is a lighthouse brand. I'd say Patagonia is a lighthouse brand because it's up here above the rest, shining above them, and people go to it because of its very messaging, because of the fact it says something very singular and very attractive to the marketplace. And that can hold in B2B in tech too. It's just a matter of, figuring out what do people want to hear. But yeah, Apple's a classic example of that. Patagonia is a very good example of that. And I actually did that exercise for Kraft because they were trying to develop lighthouse branding for balance bars at the time. So didn't really work.
Any other thoughts?
Have any of you put messaging out there that's been, and you don't have to be too specific, but that's really worked for you? And maybe some of the reasons why it worked for you and the process maybe that you used to get there?
Where do we think we're at with our marketing for each of us? How many of us have a testing harness that actually I send out a message and then I know how many people looked at my thing? Sounds like we're not there.
I just want to say, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
That this is really great and reinforcing for where we are in the company that I work for. There's only a team of 3, and we don't really have defined roles. There's the founder who really is very instrumental in a lot of it, and some of the early testing, he holds all of the information and he does share some of it, but it just makes me realize how important it is to have all your team members be able to talk about and brainstorm, because like you said, what's going on in the market, and especially with e-commerce, it's so fast moving, but yet there are so many great ways to extract information. And sometimes in a team, when it's moving very fast, nobody takes time to really sit down and brainstorm this stuff. They're just pumping out the content and it's kind of going nowhere. Like we're really guilty of not looking at our numbers. And it's just like, okay, we only have so much time. Our budget's small. We don't want to spend money, paying people an hour to extract numbers. So we're just kind of spinning our wheels. I can really see this from this presentation.
Yeah. Well, you've touched on a really good point, because sharing the information with the team is really important. And brainstorming is important too. I do brainstorming facilitation for clients to help attack some of these kinds of problems. And that's an important thing as a team initiative too. everybody's informed about kind of where you're at, what's working, what's not working. And then you go into a room and you try to gin up new messaging. And I always encourage people, especially at the story testing stage, is that if I tell them to really go out on a limb and do something extraordinarily wacky or counterintuitive sometimes, because that'll bring them back to a message, because for some reason they got to that idea in the first place. Something resonated with them or steered them towards this kind of oddball messaging or tactic, which would seem to not work in the first place. But the more you think about it, it brings you back to something you can modulate it a bit so it does work. Or you just put it out there, since this is just story testing. And I tell clients to do this, even if they're mature marketers, go out and test it. Test something that almost frightens you. Seems counterintuitive. You test it in a small way and see how people respond to it, because that's going to give you insight. The message may work, or if people object and start threatening to write letters to the Better Business Bureau, that tells you something. But if you're testing it in a small way, it's not going to create that much harm for you, but it's going to give you invaluable data.
So one of the problems I think people have is we have small businesses here. I don't think we have people with departments that are doing things. and the task of doing content, when you say it with all the enterprise words that you used, makes it feel like a 4-person job to do, when I only have like 10% of my brain left as a founder to do content. So what are the key necessary things, like the minimum necessary thing I need to do versus the big, have an inventory, have everything in place to make it go at an enterprise level, so that somebody who is just spending 10% of their brain on trying to keep their content strategy going because they got 120% of other things they need to be doing, how would you approach that for the very early startup?
I would say that you identify, there's plenty of platforms out there that you can use to automate a lot of this and to track analytics.
Pick one. Just where's the simply easy place where here I am, I've got to run an experiment. What do I do?
Let's say in social media, I've used Hootsuite, and there's another called Social Bee, which is really relatively inexpensive. That's good for small business people. And it's going to basically track the performance of your posts across whatever social channels you happen to be on. And if you're using links, you can tie that in with something like Bitly, which is a link compressor, which also tracks if the link to a blog post or to a web page is clicked on from anywhere, it'll tell you that it got clicked on, and it'll give you some analytics on who did it within the confines of data privacy laws, of course. But it's going to give you some insight into what's performing for me. If you're doing emails, especially something like a newsletter, you can through any of the big newsletter platforms or even regular emails, you can heat map those. So you can look at it and say, okay, I sent out a newsletter every quarter and it had 5 stories in it, and here are the 2 stories that got the most clicks. That tells me something about what people are interested in.
Let's back down to being more specific for a second.
Yeah.
I'm going to do an experiment. My experiment has this group of people, some sub market. Hopefully I have an idea of where that is. I have a proposal about what it is that they need to know about. And I'm going to have a call to action, whatever that is. And I'm going to take a step. And now what I really care about is not, did somebody pay attention to my post? What I really care about is that they engage, so that they engage in the next level, so they engaged in the next level and I got a sale, right? I don't really want to inflate my views and optimize inflating my views if the people I'm inflating the views with don't turn into sales at some point. So I'm going to do my thing. They're going to come to my web page. They're going to do a thing on my web page. They're going to come and do something else on my web page, and they're going to hit the buy button. And then, hopefully I track that they're happy, right?
Right.
So it sounded to me like you just said, there's these 15 different things that I need to do to track each of the steps of that process.
Oh, no, you can simplify it. I mean, if you just decided, if you had a moderate budget, you could afford to do some pay-per-click against a very specific audience. You just run a pay-per-click campaign, I'd say on LinkedIn or Google Ads, and it's going to tell you, okay, how many people clicked on it, when they clicked on it, and it'll give you they'll also give you some insight into who it was, what industry they came from, what geography, they'll help you slice and dice the data a bit. But that
So
way,
let's press into this and be more, concrete and tactical. So Carolyn has an e-commerce page, and she can sell things on her e-commerce page. So she thinks that there's a bunch of people. Give me a sub-market, Carolyn.
Like we sell a sleep product, so say sleep gummies.
Yeah, but who's the person that you're selling to? Are we talking about college students? Are we talking about
That's why I'm here.
No, but I mean, which sub-market do you currently sell to the best?
People over 50.
Okay, so old farts with arthritis who are having trouble sleeping because life is hard. Okay, so
it sounds like she's not sure.
no, I'm clear on that.
Yeah.
She has not done her sub-market analysis.
Right.
Yeah, so we could be doing college kids, we could be doing new moms, we could be doing seniors that just retired, we could be, blue collar workers who are struggling with their daily whatever. I mean, there's a bunch of these things. We want to pick a subgroup of them. I was just hoping you would say, well, I got this group that I care about. So let's say that I'm looking for new moms just because I'm picking something that's well bounded. So now I want to say something to a bunch of new moms. I'm personally not a convinced person that I should spend money at this point. I think I should go to a Facebook group for new moms, and I should say something valuable in the group like 5 or 10 times. And then I should say, oh, by the way, I'm doing this thing over there that you might want to go take a look at. So, a while of listening, a while of posting value, and then a call to action to go over there. And then I go over there using the bit.ly link. And now I see of that group, a group of people that I would call prospects. And now I'm going to say something on that web page or whatever that then outlines something. And then there's a button that is take the next step, right? Am I still using bit.ly?
You could be using bit.ly there too.
And then they go to that next step and there's a sign up for whatever and pay me money, or there's a go to this thing and sign up for this platform or whatever the next call of action is.
Right.
And there's a point at which I run out of bit.ly options.
Right. But if they're coming to your site, hopefully your site is set up so you're going to be able to do tracking on
Okay,
that.
let's test that. Bill, can you track who goes to your website with your analytics?
Yes.
Okay, so how many people are seeing your website each day?
It's been kind of sporadic. Like I've seen last week I had over 4,000 visitors. Typical visitors is like low 2,000 for a week.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
break that up. And again, it's dependent upon the day.
And do you have any way of sub-segmenting them into different subgroups?
I haven't gotten that far yet. It's just me. So it's that's what we're trying to work on.
No, I mean, that's the specific thing I'm trying to press on, is to press into this in some level of specificity, because often we hear the abstracty thing and then we don't know what the next actual thing to do is. So
Right.
I really like that I'm being specific about who I'm talking to. I really like that we're going to give a clear message that's specifically directed to them, and that it has a call to action, and that I measure the results of that call to action. I think you have to do a two-step process, because otherwise, first you got to know something about the people, and then you need to ask them something that validates what it is that you want to know. So it's actually two steps, not just did I get somebody to click, but did I get somebody to click hear my proposal and then buy, and buy might actually be, you know, pay me $1 and sign up for my platform, but or my newsletter list, right? It doesn't have to be a big thing. It just has to be something measurable, specifically measurable, that they're willing to spend resources to go to the next step, right? Now I have a customer, right?
Yeah.
Say it again, Bill.
And you could be testing, when they arrive on the site, a further level of testing, not to make it too complicated, but if you have the luxury to do this, as I said, you can have different landing pages. You could be directing one part of your subgroup that has engaged. You're going to send them to landing page A, you send them to landing page B, or you send them to landing page C, and you try out variations on your messaging to see, okay, which of those engaged the best at the landing page.
But the consequence of that ABC testing is you have to have volume.
Yeah.
Now, not everybody has volume, right? They put out things, crickets, put out another thing, crickets, put out another thing, bang, everything happens. Put out that same thing 2 weeks later, crickets, right? So the predictability on response is pretty low in the beginning, right?
Right. But then you try to figure out why the one went bang. You test it again. Maybe you test it with a different group, or maybe you can actually reach out to people and say, hey, why did you like this?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out why I had a bang last week. Almost came close to doubling the weekly traffic. Haven't been able to explain it yet.
Everybody was asleep for Easter, and now the sun is out, and it's not Easter anymore, so we can pay attention.
Want to get out. But again, it's like you can reach out to them. You can send them a poll, or you can send them an email, say, hey, you came to the site and you bought something. I'd be really curious to know why you did that.
So how do you get the email address of the person that came to the website?
Well, there's that question too, unless it's a situation where it was part of the buying process and you were able to capture their email address as part of the purchase or a warranty process or something like that.
Which is why very early on, you would like people to sign up for a list or to sign up for a platform or to sign up for. So a very early first step thing is to produce enough content that causes people to sign up and give you contact information.
That's right.
Yeah, and how that's presented. That's a big thing, how that's presented, because people shy away from that.
Right.
Well, and so that's one of the reasons when we did the startup weekend and we said, we're working on this problem. Would you like to learn more? Sign up for our newsletter and pay me $5. Right. And that was intended to filter the people that didn't want to talk anymore about it, but just were curious. Right. And so that's very easy to set up. Right. Put a little PayPal link or put a little Stripe link in there, click the thing. You can use a Google form even. It's really simplistic.
Yeah, it's on and I did a lot of years in sales promotion. One of the things you do is you do a plus up offer. So if they're going to buy it, then you say, hey, just give us your email address and we'll give you X. And that could be sign you up for a newsletter, or we'll give you something that actually has some semi-tangible value, like a little guidebook we created on using the product. Or I think for REI, the thing we pitched them was we're going to give them an outdoors person's hiking trail guide to the United States, which we were going to cobble together out of available content. But it seemed like a pretty high value PDF to receive just by opting in to receive it when they were buying a pair of, darn tough socks.
So this is a place where enterprise sales for scale and startup exploration for development diverge. I do not want the merely curious. And so giving them a little bit of a content-y thing so that they give me the name so that I can then spam them for the next little bit does not teach me anything about my customers. What I care about is the ones that are vitally interested in making this happen, the early adopters, and they're willing to go out of their way to do something. So I want to put a gate in the way so that the merely curious come back later. Maybe I take their email, but then I don't spam them. But if they paid me then I'm going to engage them in the next step and be very intimate with them, because I'm only doing like 20 to 50 people per experiment, and I want to measure my conversion rate. So again, when I go to a Facebook group and I blather in that Facebook group and I don't know how many people in that Facebook group, the fact that I got a certain number of people is not really helpful for me. What's helpful is to know that I have 20 people that signed up and leaned in once, and now I make an offer to them and 20% of them step over. And if I can keep doing that, 20 people become 4 people that signed up. Now I have a metric I can execute against. And
Right.
so being really intentional about that in the customer discovery side of things really can be very helpful. But often we're in a rush to just get something out, because we know that the first thing that's important is consistency of posting on a channel matters a lot. So you have to build an audience at some point.
Right.
So that's another question for the group here. How many people have consistency in your social media content or your content strategy, where every week or every month or whatever your calendar is, you're succeeding at delivering on that on a regular basis? I'm seeing no hands go up.
I'm just a little sidebar I'll inject here is I've had this come up with clients who conduct social media. And one of the pushbacks I get from them is, I don't want to post too often, because then I think people will say, oh, you're spamming my feed. And then I tell them, you know, the average LinkedIn user has 980 posts appear in their feed every day. There is no chance they're going to accuse you of spamming. The problem is you're going to get buried. So don't be afraid. You can vary what you're pushing out there, but get in front of them. Don't be afraid of.
I think there's a natural frequency for any given channel. And if I were posting on Twitter 14 times a day, that's completely reasonable for Twitter. If
Right.
I'm on LinkedIn and I'm posting 14 times a day, that's quite unreasonable. And I'm actually likely to get punished by the algorithm for doing that. So
It is, I would say you don't post 14 times a day, but you do post at a higher volume, and you're not posting the same thing.
no,
You're
right,
posting
always new valuable information,
or
which is
good evergreen content that has,
right.
you have faith in and has performed.
How would volume wise, what would you say for, let's say, Insta, Blue Sky, X? Like you were saying, whatever, 14 times a day on X. I don't have bandwidth for that, but like on an average, I try and hit
you
4 to 5
probably
posts
do.
a week.
You probably do have the bandwidth for X for 14 a day. You just haven't sat down for the hour and thought out the points you want to make, right?
Yeah, I gotta add inventory. I gotta fulfill order. Like again, that's
an hour a day. It's not as hard as you think. And maybe it's even 15 minutes a day, but if you don't have the mechanism in place for planning it, then it gets to be overwhelming really fast.
And as I said, there are plenty of
it's the 3 channels
like Hootsuite and Social Bee, and now they're incorporating a lot of AI. So they'll help you set up a calendar, which can be a repetitive calendar that cycles, okay, I'm gonna set up the calendar for this week, and it's gonna repeat next week,
Yeah.
and AI to create variations, because some channels don't want you to post the same thing over and over again, but the AI will help you rejigger that a bit so that it's different enough that you can post it twice or 3 times.
I would shy away from that.
Yeah, I think HubSpot does this as well, like Hootsuite. Does Hootsuite have a small business offering?
Yeah.
Okay.
It all takes over.
I would treat Blue Sky like Twitter, and I think that many posts a day on either one would work, or Mastodon. All of those I think are in the way it distributes information. It frequently is fine. It's the creation of value that's the important part, and figuring out how to get one little bit of value is the key to that. For TikTok, I totally fail at TikTok, so I have no idea how that works. But I have found a thing called Opus Pro, which cuts up videos and pulls videos apart. Like we just did this thing here, and we'll run Opus Pro against it, and we'll get a bunch of 1-minute shorts out of it. And I'll take 10 or 20 of those and sort through and find the good ones, and then hit the publish on social media button, and it'll get posted. And so with 15 minutes of work after this, I'll be able to get 4 or 5 posts on our YouTube channel into the shorts without too much trouble. So the work that I need to do for this meeting will be 15 minutes tomorrow, which will then turn into a YouTube post of the whole thing and 4 or 5 shorts. Now, if I take the shorts and I put them in that's something to post on Twitter, and I take the shorts and that's something to post in LinkedIn, I know how to do that. I have not learned how to do shorts on TikTok that turn into my audience caring about it. And that's an experiment you could do. And TikTok is one of the things you can post in Opus Pro.
And you're tracking which of those engages the best.
I'm using the YouTube analytics at the moment to tell me where those are in their engagement right now. I'm not doing anything fancier like you suggested I needed to do. Yeah. But I get that most people aren't even to that stage. They don't have a content generation engine built yet.
Right.
So I think the first step that I heard Michael say is listening deeply to the channels and the audiences and trying out of that to produce sub-markets. And after you listen, the next step is finding ways to contribute value to that channel. And then you have to do that enough that there's enough trust that you can then say something that's an ask. And then at the ask, you have to track who engages in that ask. And then my expectation is that there's another ask to that group of people that you now know the number of, which you can then figure out who's really a customer and engage in that. Am I outlining it properly?
Yeah. Yes, you are. That is pretty much it. And the interesting too is that, you know, sometimes with this kind of if you engage with people personally, if you reach out to them during the fact finding or interview process, interestingly, that's also a way to create advocacy sometimes, you know, because some of them will be extremely flattered and interested by the fact that you want to have that dialogue with them. And that can lead to, you know, greater downstream engagement from those folks.
So I think that if you're in a B2C context, that the first 1,000 people in your process are really handwork, that you're doing each of these by hand. I send a little blurb about this little thing for a little tiny thing. I watch who comes in. I interview the people that indicate that they're particularly interesting. I use that to do the feedback again. And I try to, you know, spearfish the first 1,000. And in that process, then I learn what the words are that I need to say that allow me to do the scaling later.
Yeah.
And if I have this anticipation that I'm going to do this thing, and what I'm doing now for my tests is what I use for my scaling, I'm setting myself up for trouble. When we do the open coffee conversations, we had one guy kept coming back. He's relatively successful at social media in the sense that he gets lots and lots of views, but he doesn't get lots of conversions. And so we're trying to get him to do the experiments, but he won't do the experiments in little finite chunks to measure what's going on. And he takes whatever content he creates, and then he jumps all the way to the end and tries to scale, right? Without actually knowing what the answer is to which sub-market responds to which thing, right?
As we touched on in the deck, plenty of people, you know, sometimes very successful companies, nobody should be embarrassed by that mistake. They make that mistake, you know, for various reasons. And so downstream, they end up having to do a lot of bailing and a lot of work to, again, scrub old content or get everything to align with where they ended up in final positioning. And some of the stuff they've put out there hurts them because people get the wrong apprehension of what they're about. Or say,
Totally.
so that's not my pain point, you know?
Mhm.
Or if this post is from 1989, I don't think I'm going to give it any credence.
Yeah, you should at least update the date, right?
Yeah.
Go back and touch it and say, you know, we fixed the little bit here and it's been updated.
Yeah, well,
So
but,
do we have more questions from folks that want to dive into anything in particular? So is there a way we can help people actually take action on doing an experiment?
if you're asking me, I'm
No, I'm asking them if they're willing to lean in on the question of, okay, now I heard this overview. Now I need to take and operationalize it and do one.
Yeah.
What kind of help would you like to do the first experiment from where you are?
Well, I have 5 personas, so I need to target each one of those. I think I need to go through each one and see who's of those 5, who should I be targeting first?
I would bet you that you do not have 5 personas, but that they are abstracty still and you haven't measured them enough. That's just the default
Agreed.
place that I'm
Fair.
at. And
Yeah, we
so
have 5
there's,
targets,
right. And when
target
we do
personas.
this design thinking and we have these user personas and we do it all from top down McKinsey reports, the end result is it's all abstracty and I still can't actually get my hands on a real person. And so if you take the people in your database of people who actually bought and you look at the persona that's there, and then you ask the question, well, let's assume that this persona has many sub markets. In that abstracty thing that you think you have, what experiments could I run that would distinguish these groups from each other in terms of content? And that would be a very interesting experiment to run. And I would want to be measuring things like not only my conversion rate, but how fast they lean in, or what kind of speed they spend, what kind of product price kind of thing, if I can get towards that, right? So I'm looking for markets that are big enough. I'm looking for markets that buy fast over markets that are extremely big but buy slow. And so those are experiments that would be useful to frame. So, Bill, would you like to suggest how you might do an experiment against that in the next 2 weeks? Because he said, 7 to 10 days. You spend a little bit of time marketing it and run the thing for a week to a week and a half. And then 2 weeks from now, you should have an answer to a question.
Yeah, so that's where I'm limited. I have to retheme my site, and
No, you
that's going to
don't.
happen.
No, you don't.
I do. My theme
No.
has not been supported, or forwarded development hasn't happened on my theme in 2+ years. So I'm limited.
You don't even have to have them touch your website
yeah.
to run the experiment.
Yeah, John's right, because it'll give you guidance when you do retheme it, because the data you're capturing, the insights you're getting out of running these experiments is stuff you can use to apply to your site, to your theme, to your message.
Well, the idea is different landing pages. That's adding to the site. So depending upon how they're coming in.
Doesn't even have to be a landing page on your website.
Does it?
Okay, help me.
It could be in any platform. It could be on Facebook. It could be in LinkedIn. And you can do purchases directly off of those. So even if you're selling a thing, it can not even ever touch your site.
Yeah, because when we're talking about an experiment, this doesn't mean it's the end all be all experiment. It's just the first experiment you're conducting to learn what you can at this stage. And that can evolve into experiments downstream. But it doesn't mean you have to be doing something as elaborate as, oh, well, I've got to have a landing page and I've got to have special content.
Okay, well, so here's one. So there's a Facebook group called Everything's Beachy, about 175,000 people on it. We do a raffle, $100 gift certificate at beachnecessities.com every month. That's just to gauge how would you suggest I reach into that group and just try and generate some awareness?
I have lots of opinions, but I'll let Michael talk first.
If I was in that group, then I wouldn't necessarily be doing something that is rewards based, because of the fact that then you're going to get people who are interested in the reward. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you know, people who are interested in that might be, if you're doing a raffle, you're capturing some data and you can reach out to them laterally. So that's one thing you might do. But other things you can do is you can go in and I'm big on polling. Go in there and do a poll, and not just kind of an off the cuff poll, just something that's maybe a little more trenchant, that touches on some of the issues, you know, in the areas that you're in with those people, things that are relevant to them, so they can learn about each other.
Okay.
You know? And
You have to check.
I would go back earlier to the how can I say something that the reading of this creates value, and the reading more then selects the people that want to dive deep on the topic, which that can do a second offer for doing some like Zoom workshop about it, or buy this book, or a bunch of other things that turn into something that move money, right? But the initial thing would be creating value in the reading. So I get zero value in the reading of take this poll. I get zero value in the reading in hit this lottery ticket for a gift. What are the problems that this group of 175,000 are having? How do I segment the problems into demographics? And then how do I talk to, when people try to put their boat in the water, this kind of thing is happening. When people try to take their boat across state lines, this kind of thing is happening. There's got to be little stories in there. If not that, then who is the best person who does XYZ, and then interview them, and then post some excerpt of that interview in there, and then put the main interview on a page somewhere. And then at the bottom of the page, have a let's do another interview where you can join in for this speaker of this other guy that's in this other problem, right? So you build the chain of three, right?
I'll push back a little bit on the poll value, because the poll, depending on how you set it up, can have value, because people want to see, because when you publish the results, people see, oh, here's how the group feels.
Remember that I
convert that poll into a post within that community that says, hey, here's what people said about this, and here's what we think, here are our insights, here's why these things are important to folks.
The thing that I said that I want to put a spotlight on is value in the reading.
Yeah.
So when I ask for a poll, I don't get value in the reading. I get value at the end when the poll is done, but I should be producing a bunch of value in the reading kinds of posts in a channel so that people are alert and warm to my next conversation, not that the automatic default filter is up. I already have 5,000 things to look at. My filter is up. I'm going through and deleting things as fast as I can delete things, unless, oh, this person's saying something, he said something interesting before, I'm going to pay attention, right?
Well, all the things you spoke to, those all hold too. Doing a post, doing a video snippet of some sort, doing a curated post where you're pulling a news item and you're offering commentary on something that people may not have realized about, the impact of changes in Washington on our waterways, so you're finding a news source elsewhere.
Politics on water safety. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree.
So Brandy joined us late.
Yeah,
I don't want to put you on the spot. Oh, were you okay? I don't want to put you on the spot, but was there any questions that you wanted answered? Even if it's something you think we've talked about 3 times, we want to be helpful. So
I'm not sure, because I joined late and I apologize. So this is very sort of new for me. I mean, I have a professional services business, and we've been working in the B2B space for many years, and we launched a SaaS product recently. So I think reaching those people, those buyers, have been a challenge. I know that's not a question and wide open. So.
Have you got sub-segments identified for the people that you want?
Yes, very specifically lawyers and litigators at law firms.
So then I would tell you that lawyers is a very big abstract group and not specific enough. And so
Well,
if
they're
you were,
litigators, so they're very particular practice.
So
Michael has
litig-
actually, Michael has worked
Right.
quite a bit
Yeah.
with lawyers.
Yeah. Our
You're-
professional
John's
services
absolutely-
side is focused on lawyers. Sorry, go ahead.
No, John's absolutely right. It all depends on, and again, it's, you're talking lawyers, sometimes the lawyers, depending on the product you're offering, they may be the referrer, but they're not the specifier. They're not the one who necessarily ratifies it. Sometimes they are. So it would be something where you.
so are you
Yes.
going after people in big firms or in medium firms with a couple of people? Or are you doing the solo?
They're litigation teams, so generally speaking, a decent sized practice, but more than say a team of 5. But you
It's
may
so-
have, it depends on the case. So you may have like a lot of our current clients, like you may have 150 attorney litigation firm. That's a target, or 150 litigation practice within a 2,000 attorney firm. So I would say generally speaking, though, we're going after the medium-sized firms with litigation practices.
Right. So, there'd be a discussion about who within those firms are the ones that you really have to reach. Who are the referrers and the decision makers,
Mhm.
who are the personas, and what kind of messaging do we need to apply,
And where are they hanging out?
Yep.
so, yeah.
Yeah, so if there's a Facebook group for lawyers, I would be really surprised if they say anything interesting
Yeah.
in that channel. But I bet you that there's a bar that lawyers that are litigators hang out in that would be useful to go put a sign on the door.
Yes.
And I bet you that there is a conference for lawyers that's probably a very interesting place to be. And I am almost sure there's a mailing list somewhere that is secret that
Yeah.
different groups have that you would
Yeah.
like to post something. There is a guy, long ago in the ancient dark times, we had a thing called Usenet, and it had different channels. There was a
Mhm.
guy that wrote Novell printer drivers, and he would, people would go to the Novell printer group, and people would complain about why their printer wasn't working, and he would answer the question. And in his signature, he said, "I write printer drivers, blah, blah, blah. Here's my contact information," right? And he didn't say anything about writing printer drivers, but he would post something. And every time he posts something, he would get a bunch of queries from the signature. And then, he bought a couple of houses off of that. So if you can be on a channel, and sometimes your signature is enough.
Right.
But
Or you
you have to be creating value in the message enough that people look for the answer that you just posted.
Yeah.
and I've done things like that, for instance, with Above the Law or law.com. Do some pay for play in terms of getting content nested there, or even doing PPC or sponsoring things with them, doing a partnership play with one of those sites as well, and putting some valuable content out there and directing people to, and sometimes that ends up being more of a thought leadership thing. But it doesn't always have to be, especially if you can put a commercial message in there of some sort.
Yeah.
And any other thoughts you have, Michael, for Brandy?
Oh gosh, let me think. You're absolutely right about the fact that you're not going to find lawyers. Certain lawyers, the GC is going to be the one who might be reading law.com, or a site that is oriented towards him, her. So you have to be very particular about the kind of content you're putting in front of them. The ones you might be more concerned with are the specifiers, the ones who are really going to be looking for a solution, and eventually that are going to elevate it to the GC, and he's just going to stamp it yes or no. So that would be, say, the head of legal operations. within a firm like that, depending on what the product is, depending on what the services you're offering.
So this sounds like a thing for LinkedIn to me.
It largely is, though it might also be some of those legal sites that I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Trying to
So
get it.
I know that for startups, the Startup Law blog actually has a bunch of the startup lawyers in the area who pay attention to it, right? So I wonder if there's a litigation law blog anywhere.
And legal operations, if that figured into the calculus, is you can go to, there are a couple of organization sites that are pretty big that have a lot of members who are part of the legal operations. That's why my clients were sponsors of organizations. So they have a lot of presence on their sites. They'd be doing blogging on their sites. They'd be advertising on those sites, because legal operations, more so on corporate, but more and more middle to large firms are using legal ops nowadays. So those people, depending again on what the service or the product is, they're going to have a lot of say, as specifiers who are going to say, we ought to be buying this, or we ought to be hiring these guys because they're going to make my job easier. And then they take it up to the GC for approval.
Thank you. Makes sense.
Any other thoughts, Michael?
Let's see. I would say, well, you guys will probably have presence at conferences and gatherings within the profession, correct?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, so you just get out there and you ask a lot of questions. Ask, and even, and to John's point earlier, put some content in front of them at those events to see what registers.
Okay.
Carolyn, any questions or thoughts?
I would just add that, this is the kind of thing that you can never do enough of. It can be time consuming, and there's just a million different things to try and think about, and to just try to stay in the place of having fun with it and not getting down on the fact that, I didn't get to this and I didn't do that part and I didn't do that part. There's a lot to do. So just keep at it.
Yeah, and as part of that brainstorming process at the front end, you're looking at, what are my capabilities? What kind of capacity do I have to do this? And you narrow your scope accordingly. And you say, okay, I can only conduct such and such a test across 1 channel, 2 channels, 3 channels, and I can only conduct X number of tests, as a start. And I have to cadence it out. So maybe I'm only doing 1 test a month or 1 test a week. Whatever I can accommodate, but I have to commit to doing the testing.
Consistency.
Whatever my constraints are.
Yep.
I was just going to say, Brandy, when you go to those events, it's also a great place in those face-to-faces. Lawyers love to talk about themselves, so it's a great place to recruit them, create content for you that you can byline under their byline on your site.
Good point.
Or interviews or whatever. Use it as a content generation opportunity.
So, Michael, is there any other work you're doing along these lines that you want to make sure people know about?
Well, a lot of what I've done is beyond story testing, is actual development of messaging architecture. And as I said, that's critically important. It's messaging architecture and having the discipline to stick to a messaging architecture. You draft a messaging architecture that reflects all of the pillars you've arrived at, all of the key messages, and then you have to make sure that people are accountable for observing it. It's the hymn book that everybody is singing from. And so they just have to understand that you follow these guidelines, you follow these rules. And that's what I help companies with once you've gotten past the testing stage and you have an idea about what you want to say and who you have to say it to. But that percolates down into everything an organization does, right down into product sell sheets. And like I said, the email that a sales engineer may be sending off to check on the status of a particular customer. or a problem resolution, all of those things. You know, you're just generating everything, the persona for the company, the tone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are important, but those are all going to be an outcome of story testing. You just have to make sure that story testing nets out in terms of putting together an architecture like that, that helps drive all of your messaging in a consistent, controllable way. And from there, you're able to get into capital M marketing and you're scaling.
I think the important thing for experiments is that you can run experiments without fixing your website, without doing all sorts of things. You can do little tiny baby things that teach you, that are not about being perfect in how you present your capital M marketing, but are very specific to answer a question.
Right.
And then when you learn the answer to that, you can improve and improve, and incremental improvement gets you a very long way. And so putting in your way all of the perfection you have to build is a great way not to do experiments.
Right. And there's a good process for that. You know, I'll put in a semi plug for myself. I do these workshops, which the first workshop focuses on exactly what you were just talking about, is like, you know, what's the lay of the land? How much can I achieve? Who am I speaking to? What are the, you know, the general messages I want to be able to test, you know, starting to set up a matrix. Then the second workshop gets into the nitty gritty about, okay, we have to develop a specific matrix and a specific calendar for this and lay out, you know, pretty specific messaging that we want to test, and pretty specific timing, and identify the specific channels that we're looking for, and what are, you know, what are our KPIs here? You know, what constitutes success out of all of this? So it's going from generalized brainstorming down to what I call convergence, which is, you know, narrowing it down and turning it into an actionable, executable plan for your testing.
Cool.
Michael also does professional brainstorming for companies. We help people with websites and with building websites, the technical side of it, if anybody's looking for help with that also.
So if they want to get a hold of you again, where do they go, Michael?
They can reach out to me at michael@michaelsemer.com. That's probably the easiest way. Or you can visit my site, my website, which is simple enough, michaelsemer.com. And there is a section devoted to story testing there, which is michaelsemer.com/story testing. It talks about the workshops.
Well, did I get your email correct in the chat?
Let me see. Saw it flash up there and I did not
It's
capture it.
just michael@michaelsemer.com.
It's michael@michaelsemer.com.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Michael, for doing that work. I'll try and get this set up onto the onto the YouTube channel the next day or so. And I'd love to hear about any experiments people run, and please drop a note. So thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. This was excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.